welcome to Phoenix Cinema Podcast. I am Chris Austin.
I'm Ian Hawks.
And joining us again is the cinematographer, Mitchell Perrin. Hey, Mitch.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you back, sir. And this is a podcast where we discuss what's showing at the historic Phoenix Cinema in East Finchley, North London. And this week, we're discussing the classic British comedy, Henry Cornelius's Passport to Pimlico from 1949 as part of Phoenix's Once More with Ealing season of Ealing Studios Classics. Under the stewardship of producer Michael Balcon, the legendary West London Film Studio created some of the great works of British cinema in the 1940s and 50s. Actually, the reason I wanted to do this film is because I live in Ealing. In fact, I live right around the corner, no more than a 10-minute walk from Ealing Studios, where this film was made, which was so cool to think about while watching it. I attended the Metropolitan Film School, which is literally attached to the studios, back in 2009. And I've lived in Ealing for a couple of years, but never really knew the legacy and film history of this district in West London until very recently. I started hearing about the Ealing comedies on the film podcasts I listened to, and then I started digging a little deeper, and I bought a book written by Robert Sellers, no relation to the great Peter, and it's called The Secret Life of Ealing Studios, and the person who wrote the foreword and introduction to the book is the one and only Martin Scorsese. Well, honestly, color me sold on that book. So I've been dipping into it now and then. Fascinating read. And I'm so pleased Phoenix are doing a season of these movies. It felt like the perfect time to dive into it. And so, yeah, on that note, what did you guys think? Have you seen any Ealing comedies before?
I strangely had a film professor who was really into like British cinema, and we watched. I didn't, I think, realize this at the time, but I watched a disproportionate amount of black and white British cinema when I was in college compared to a lot of my peers. When then I would reference movies like, surely you know Kind Hearts and Coronets, and people would be like, what the hell is that movie? I'm like, oh, I wrote like a term paper about it. So like, anyways, yeah, so I have seen Kind Hearts and Coronets.
Amazing.
Which people may know because it stars Alec Guinness, who then went on to play Obi-Wan Kenobi in the first Star Wars film, which is kind of fun. And I think I've also seen The Lady Killers. I could be wrong about that. Yeah, also
dude, I had no idea.
Alec Guinness one.
I had no idea that the Coen Brothers movie was an Ealing comedy remake. I didn't have a clue.
Yes, yeah, that's a remake of that one. So, yeah, I've seen a couple. I could see a lot more, but yeah, that's my kind of brief exposure to Ealing comedies.
Excellent. What about yourself, Mitch? Yeah,
I had seen zero. I had a professor in college who taught a course just on Terry Gilliam. And so as far as I knew, British comedy started in the 80s and carried on from there. I know people were funny before then. Somehow I have zero encyclopedic knowledge of British comedy prior to that time. So this was, enlightening and also a little frightening. When you can uncover something, it's like you open a closet in your house that you didn't know was there. And so this is exciting. I gotta watch some more and kind of see what's going on, because it was a treat. It was an absolute treat to watch.
Yeah, I love it.
Honestly.
Isn't it funny how, like, this is a tangent to maybe just to people who went to art school in any art form, but it's funny how, like, you go to college and you start getting exposed to art for the first time, and you just think that your professors are just the people who know everything and know the best of what there is to know. And then it's not until you leave that you realize, like, oh, like, not everybody had a course just about Terry Gilliam their entire time in school. It's like your professors just deliver to you. Like, I had one of my professors was the leading scholar on Monty Python, actually. I mean, wow. he everything he published, he published like the definitive Monty Python books. And so it's like, I got a lot of information about Monty Python in school, but it's just because that's what he's writing his research papers on, you know what I mean? So it's the thing that he's drinking all the time. It's just funny to realize those types of biases where depending on who taught you about art and film, you end up kind of getting their taste without realizing it.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned Terry Gilliam too, because that's in our film club that we have to watch 2 Terry Gilliam movies this week and next. The Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Brazil next week.
Fantastic.
So that's cool. Yeah, I for me this was it was a first time watch of any Ealing Studios movie, and I didn't know what to expect, and I thought this was really enjoyable. I thought it was a really interesting snapshot of the temperature, literally, of the nation only 4 years after World War II, and just a really fun, a communal sort of experience as they get, this big farce about Pimlico actually being Burgundy, and it was so lighthearted and it was so much fun. And I at one point in the movie, I noticed I just have this big smile on my face. I'm really just enjoying this, And immediately, as soon as they started talking, I was like, oh, where are the subtitles? Because I don't know what the fuck these people are saying. And I had to laugh because I was like, I don't know how Mitch and Ian are gonna do with this. And I couldn't. There was no subtitles to put on, so I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Here we go then." And I feel like eventually I kind of my ears sort of adjusted to the patter of how they were speaking. How did you guys do with that?
It's funny you brought this up because there was 1 or 2 lines I missed, but I was actually surprised. I feel like I did better than I expected. I don't know. Maybe there's a certain. I don't know what it is. I literally have no idea what to credit it to. But it actually is surprising to me that you had a hard time understanding it, because I was actually surprised for being a historic British film that I felt like I caught most of the dialogue pretty well, actually.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, I didn't miss a beat. I think it is inherent to the fact that we're already listening to a different accent. So we're already a little our instant
more
attenuation.
Attuned.
Yeah,
right.
we already have to tune in for the accent anyway. So I think it's like, I don't know. I can usually understand the Welsh accent pretty well, and I think that's like,
wow, better than me.
Like, I think it's I don't know. It's like you're already out of your standard dialect, so it's you're engaging that part of your brain. Whereas maybe it's harder for Brits to understand because it's an aged dialect,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, potentially. And also I think what helped with like sort of adjusting to that initially, and I mean I'm talking about the first 10 minutes or so, is that this being an older movie, I don't know, I feel like when you watch movies from the 30s, 40s, 50s, everything is slightly more heightened in their physicality. And so the story is naturally just being told to you through their expressions and their incredibly interesting faces. Yes. And so, that really helps as well. So that was lovely. It wasn't too much of it didn't continue for too long, that struggle.
I think it was a fantastic premise. I guess a setting. The setting was remarkable. We have a heat wave. It's so, it's sort of oversaturated with this post-war theme throughout, but it's not the point of the movie so much. There's like, you can really feel that it's a slice of pie of a time that's like Britain recovering from World War II. And I think it's just an extravagant and frankly silly place to set a comedy. Like the entire setup of the movie with the bomb and all these things is like the heat wave. You feel like you're watching like a Cuban American film from like the 60s at the very beginning. You're sort of meandering through this like almost tropical scene of everybody sunning in this heat wave. And then we land on what feels like probably one of the more unique premises to a film I've ever experienced, where there's these two men trying to preserve this historical artifact of the last unexploded bomb from World War II, and that being the setup for a story that ultimately has very little to do with that is, I think, one of the pieces of genius in this film, right? Like, we move on from that fairly quickly and into like our central plot, but that being the setup is I think visionary.
Yeah, there's that
great point.
There's that one line the constable says when he comes down and he says, "Oh, they found another unexploded bomb, so the museum doesn't want this one anymore. We'll blow it up."
Yeah.
Have our listeners seen the film at the time of this? I don't want to spoil anything for them, obviously, but do we have any rules?
It's kind of, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like we'll try and be as spoiler free as possible. Just kind of saying just enough about the movie to kind of get people interested, I guess, if anyone wants to go and check it out.
So folks out there, I'll bite my tongue going forward, but trust that this film has quite an explosive premise.
Well, and I think, it's interesting that you brought this up. There's something about the writing of this, script and the film that that I think it would make it really hard to get produced today, but I actually think it's a missing ingredient in our media landscape, which is that there are, like the modern day equivalent of this movie now is like The Purge or something, where it's like, oh, there's no laws, like we're all gonna murder each other, and it's there's so many things in the film that should have been big plot points that were not. Like there's this bomb, and then it turns out the movie's not really about the bomb. There's also there's a whole thing about, there's a guy who shows up that says, he's this legitimate heir, right? And in any movie I feel like made today, he would be a fraud. He would have to be a fraud, And the plot point around discovering that would be a big part of the movie, and it's just frankly not. And it's like there's
he has little to no bearing on the plot, to be honest.
Seriously.
He shows up and then doesn't change much.
And there's it's this thing where it really is this comment. It's like, but what's so cool about that is I think it actually does. I do think the movie's about something that is big and dramatic. It's about people who have a love for their neighborhood and a love for their country and are willing to really stick up for that. And it's about community understanding that and kind of realizing, oh, that's important. And realizing that this little shred of a neighborhood that has a bombed out apartment complexes and has been through hell to survive here is as good as any exotic place you would get a passport to go to, right? Like this little place, and that is one of the most important things you could talk about, right? Is basically honoring your home, honoring your neighborhood, honoring your little community. Yeah. And I think it's so great that rather than kind of falling prey to being, well, let's make this movie as silly as possible, let's make the bomb as big as possible, let's make they have these things that keep you really engaged and you move through it, and it's these plot points that are nice and they add tension, but are never become so out of scale that you stop just enjoying the people and enjoying the community and enjoying the relationships.
Yeah, totally, and it's that is the balance of the movie too. What I'm trying to say is the movie itself, the background of the film is incredibly dramatic and very serious. And, and what you just spoke to there, Ian, as well, we see a shot at one point of these buildings that are just completely bombed out. Yeah. This is a town that's literally shell-shocked. And going through post-war trauma and post-war rationing and all these other sort of bureaucratic restrictions that are now in place due to the war. And yet they craft this feel-good movie out of it, and they make it about the strength of the people within a community and each other, and they make the rebelliousness against the restrictions that that are now in place. You feel so free with it. You support them in this. Yes, we are now the House of Burgundy. Let's do this. And yet, at the end of the day, bringing it back to, well, Pimlico was a paradise the entire time. It's Yeah, it's a really lovely sentiment. It really is.
And I think it's also this, not being English myself, but it feels like a proud English film. Like it is serious. I mean, it's very serious in its constant reminders. There's a lovely line in the middle of the movie that says, I got to paraphrase because I'm not that smart, but a woman at one point says, well, I'm English, and therefore I want to exercise my right to be Burgundian.
Yes.
It's so flippant and lighthearted, but I think that theme carries throughout the film where like it's weirdly patriotic and it's also being critical. I think, we would have had to see it in the time, but it feels like it's being critical of what the public feels are arbitrary bureaucratic sort of
right
post-war restrictions. Even the conclusion of the film, which we won't spoil, is basically adding bureaucracy. Like the resolution of the film is another layer of bureaucracy, which I think is funny and like is a bit of the statement from the filmmakers. And I think some of the more pointed of the time jokes went over my head. Not being from the region where the film takes place, but B, also not having lived in that time. I think there's some really fantastic physical comedy with ration cards and, papers and all these sorts of things, which I think it's really thumbing its nose at what it views to be arbitrary nationalism and celebrating like more of an emotional and community-based nationalism. And in that context, the conclusion of the film feels much more powerful. I think that it's, at face value, kind of quick and tidy. But I think, in a larger context of what the film is poking fun at, the conclusion is very satisfying in its non-conclusiveness, if that makes any sense.
Totally. That's very well said. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's encouraging for me, too. Like, well, it's interesting because we didn't talk about Rome Open City, but I know that the Phoenix showed it just recently, which is a post-war Italian film, and it's one of my it's high on my list. I love that movie, but I've been thinking about that a lot and I don't want to get too much into this, but like there has been there's the headlines recently have been challenging, not just for like the world itself, but I think especially for the film industry and not especially, I shouldn't say that, but also for the film industry for certain matters. And it's like, I think it's really inspiring to see like, oh yeah, like some of these films that come out of this post-war era when there were so few kind of like resources, when things were so battered and people had been through so much, and then they make a little gem of a piece of art. And I watch it, I mean, now it's like, 70 years later, 75 years later, and it speaks to me, and it's lovely, and it's beautiful. And it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. It doesn't have the big spectacle and the CGI and, like, all this stuff. But it's like, I think it's just a good reminder of, like, oh, yeah, even if the economy goes down the chute and, suddenly nobody wants to put money into movies anymore, it's like, that's not the thing, though, that makes a movie a movie. Like, what makes a movie is these people getting together with a camera and a script and doing a performance. And there's almost a more of an authenticity to seeing just being like, you know what? Yeah, let's film with this destroyed building as the backdrop. And it's going to actually be more engaging than us trying to build a set that isn't that, because that is kind of the real context of this story, and it's just really inspiring to me to see kind of people making really great art when, not necessarily all of the physical resources are there.
Yeah, and it's I don't know what it's encouraging, and it feels so it's almost like in defiance of, right? No matter what we're going through, we are going to continue to make art. We're going to tell stories, and for me as well, it's like a time capsule. One thing that I love to do is go back and watch these older films and watch these actors who had lived through the war, who had experienced it day in and day out, and now they're making a movie. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, it's so full. You know, I could go and make a World War II movie now, and I would draw on my own experiences, and I would do the best job I can as an actor, but I did not live through World War II. These guys did. It reminds me of the movie Judgment at Nuremberg. Do you guys ever see that film? I love that movie.
Yet, dude.
Oh, Ian, you're going to love this film. And there's this moment where they walk through this bombed out Berlin, these two characters, and as they're walking through this complete, shell of a city, in this nearby bar, these locals, these Germans, are singing, and they're banging their pints, their mugs, and they're all in unison singing against the backdrop of this utter decay and destruction and chaos. And it's so incredibly touching. Yeah, it's like I said, just really encouraging to see these kinds of movies. Yeah, also, sorry, just to say, nominated for Best Screenplay. I only found that out today as an Oscar. So yeah.
Oh, really?
Very
That's
cool.
Fun. That's very fun.
Yes, I think. Well, going back to what you were saying, also, Ian, about using the backdrop you have, I think they're being self-aware. I think one of the most profound sets in the movie is never constructed. It's the pool. Which lives through the film as a model, we cut to it now and again, but we cut to it sitting on a table. And right. I think also a hole in the ground, I think that's very self-aware of them. I think that they're really using the post-war landscape in a way that even us as a modern audience will never understand. And I think one of the most fun things about watching this film was challenging myself to be in the space with them, to be in a theater in 1949.
Yes,
absolutely, in stitches over this film. It's I watched it twice, and the first time I was like, what's going on? Like, this is wild. And the second time I was like, okay, I'm 42, the war was hard, and I'm out with the lads, and that was a really enjoyable watch through, and I think that I challenge the viewer listening to this podcast to really put themselves in a post-war landscape and enjoy the film as an escapist audience member, because I think that it stands up on its own for sure in modern day, but I think that it's even more enjoyable if you can be the audience that it was written for then, because the jokes are funnier, the setting is more bleak, the government makes more sense, and it's a good time no matter what. But I really encourage the audience to try to get to do their work as an actor as well, and be the audience that the film was made for.
Oh, I'm so pleased you said that, Mitch. I'm so pleased you said that. And that makes it all the more powerful in its comedy, too. Yeah. 100%. That's great. That's great, pal. What would you guys... This is a tough one. What would you guys pair this movie with? Ian, you kick us off.
Okay. I had two ideas, actually, but I'm going to stick with this one. I'm going to pair this with Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee from 1989.
Hey. You might be a genius.
And it's funny because at first, the only reason was because of basically that opening shot of like a bunch of people who are in a city, in the middle of a city, and it's super hot. And the camera just kind of finds these people who are in the middle of, they're waking up and they're working and they're commenting on the news that day and stuff. But then as I let that idea simmer in my head, I liked it even more and more. Do the Right Thing is about this neighborhood in Brooklyn that is kind of its own little world compared to the world outside. And then when the world outside comes in and tries to tell them how to do things, it leads to catastrophic results. And I think, but it's also a film that I think, for the most part, similarly to this film, where it could have gotten out of hand and become really big. One of my favorite things about Do the Right Thing is that it really is just about the relationships. There's not these huge high, I mean, obviously with the exception being the finale, but kind of throughout the core of the film, there's not these kind of huge high tension moments as much as it's this slow building heat, this simmering tension, and these building relationships and friendships between, these characters. So, yep, that's what I'm pairing it in, and I love the film, so it's always just nice to bring it up and talk about it more.
Excellent.
This makes
pairing.
So much sense. I'm envious of your ability to get there.
Welcome to my world every week, Mitch.
mine is quite out there. I didn't feel that I had enough knowledge within the late 40s, early 50s genre of comedy in England to try and pair it with something that had a lot of logic base to it. But instead I went pre-war US and found it's hard to view as a horror film now, but really is a fantastic thriller and period piece. It's RKO's Cat People from 1942.
Oh, I love Cat People.
I've heard of this.
I'm so glad you brought this movie up.
And is that Tournier or something?
It is Tournier, yeah. And it's a little bit extravagant in the same way. It deals with themes of like a fear from afar, or like the return of a lineage or something. And that's like pretty loose. Like, I'm reaching here and I'm aware of that. But what's really special about it, I think, in terms of its relationship to this film, it is a film out of a pre-World War II involvement US. Like, it's sort of falling in that the war's going on, but it's not all sorted. US, and it is a film about a fear from afar. So I think that watching these films, maybe watching Cat People first and then enjoying our film second, could be a nice evening. And that was kind of what I was going for, was like, how can we kind of create a really nice cohesive evening of double feature? And so that is where my pairing comes from. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's really like this film about a Serbian woman is it too much to spoil? She basically becomes a cat when she's aroused. It takes place in the Central Park Zoo.
I'll read you the IMDb logline. An American man marries a Serbian immigrant who fears that she will turn into the cat person of her homeland's fables if they are intimate together.
What is going on?
Oh, it's so good though, dude. It's such a good movie. I'm so glad that Mitch brought this up. I watched it at school.
Thematically, it's a story of lineage from afar. This is more fear-based and less sort of community resolve based. And it also has an ending which I think is tidy, fast, and requires you to be in the moment to enjoy. Yeah. And I think that because of that, like, this is almost like gets you prepped to jump into the world that is Passport, if that makes any sense. So strange pairing, do with it what you will, but you could have a really fun black and white double feature evening where you watch this film at home and then come on into the cinema to watch Passport.
Well, also,
that's
I feel like probably
Mitch.
Speaks, and maybe this is just me thinking too poorly of my own people, but it speaks maybe nicely to the way that Americans view outside forces versus the way that the Brits are in this film, which is like, they're probably going to turn into cats and murder us.
So it's two theses on outside involvement in a local community, and I think that they're two different times, and that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Okay, well, that's going onto my list of movies to check out. That's for sure. Great. I've paired it with. Listen, this is a film that we only spoke about a few episodes ago on the podcast, myself and Nathaniel. But I've gone with the Italian movie La Chimera, which came out not so long ago, maybe last year. And the reason I've gone with that is because it reminded me of this film in so many ways. It's so similar in so many ways, in its sense of community, in its joy of the community. It feels like both of these films share a similarity in how they pack the frame with such interesting characters and people, and the locations, the production design, the set design. And La Chimera is about Josh O'Connor, the British actor playing a British archaeologist who basically does tomb robbing, steals precious artifacts in 1980s Italy. And yeah, it just felt so similar to me without basically in those aspects that I just mentioned. And in La Chimera, he has this gift where he kind of puts two sticks together and tries to feel out a sense of where artifacts may be hidden underneath the ground. And at the very end of Passport to Pimlico, we've got a character doing the same fucking thing. I was like, oh, hang on a minute. So is this a thing? I thought La Chimera made that up.
No,
I thought it was
a thing, dude.
Wow. Do you know what that's called?
It's called dowsing. It's called dowsing. So those things are called dowsing rods, and there are certain people who have the gift, and you can use it to find water, you can use it to find treasure, you can do other things, and it's an old folk practice. I don't know where it originates from, but
wow.
I've only seen it in the context of finding where to drill a well.
Yes, I think that was a common practice, but it was used for gold too. I'm familiar with this because of my Mormon background, because this was a thing that people were doing in it was really common in the U.S. in the 1830s, 1820s, kind of this folk magic religion where people were finding ancient treasure buried by people and stuff like that. So yeah,
amazing.
It's a real thing.
It's a real thing. Well, there you go. Listen, I'm learning something new every day on this podcast. Oh, fantastic. That's great, guys. Listen, that's an incredible triple feature there. I love it. I guess we'll leave it. We'll wrap it up there. But I just want to say thank you both so much. This was a great conversation. Thank you for diving in on this movie. It was great fun discussing it with you both. And Mitch, thank you for coming back, sir. It was great having you.
Thanks for having me on. I'll be back anytime.
We'll have you back anytime. All right. Thank you, Ian. I will see you on the next one, sir. I want to say special thanks to Mitch Perrin and also to the Phoenix Cinema. Our music is by Stefan Krieger and our episodes are edited by Noah Anderson. This is the second film in Phoenix's Once More with Ealing season, the first being The Lavender Hill Mob from 1951, and the next two will be Whiskey Galore from 1949, and that will be screening July 21st, followed by Kind Hearts and Coronets, which Ian mentioned earlier, also 1949, screening August 18th. Get to the Phoenix and watch these movies. I know I certainly will be. Tell you what, how about I just meet you there?